If you're willing to think outside of the box, don't protect what you have, because that's usually where the pain comes from. And my experience is everything I left behind was the right decision.
The investing journey is not as linear as a lot of people make it out to be because your life circumstances change.
You can't solve a complex equation without a complex equation in front of you. If you are willing to do whatever it takes, you actually tend to build more creatively and with more upside potential outside of a job.
I think too that there's a concept, I've come to label it, own your upside.
The ability to make quick decisions, even if they're incorrect, is often the most valuable skill set you can have.
Welcome back to the Hybrid Real Estate Professional Podcast. Today I have my good friend Luke Gilbert joining me. He was a previous podcast guest and he has an incredible backstory. I want to make sure we link to that podcast episode. But ever since we met, we hit it off really well. And we actually formed a small mastermind group as part of Luke's community. And we meet every other week and we text pretty much every day, trying to help each other advance in our respective businesses. And we came up with a cool idea today that we're going to try out, which is essentially some hot seat coaching. Luke is a very talented coach, and there's a lot of stuff going on in my world that he thought, let's set up some hot seat coaching, let him ask me some questions, see if we can uncover some stuff. I'm a coach myself, but I always seek advice and perspective from others. And Luke is someone who I deeply respect his opinion. So Luke, excited to have you on the show. Thanks for coming, man.
Thank you for that warm introduction, Aaron. And I think what's exciting about this conversation today is our mastermind is specifically about personal brand. And then consider what you're going through, a rebranding. I think it's more of a refocusing of your personal brand, which it's like this scary place nobody wants to go. I've been doing this thing forever. How can I pivot? It's really like you pivot because you as a person are the brand and the growth requires pivoting.
100%. And you know that I face a little bit of resistance, personal like friction in myself as I try and figure out how to present what I'm doing compared to what I have been doing before. And so it's definitely been a point of friction and a point of growth that I've had to really work on. So yeah, definitely a lot to peel back there.
Yeah, and I don't think that's unique to you. That's the beautiful thing about it. Everybody watching this is going to relate to that. Like, we're all trying to build a brand, and the mistake we always make is we call it something else and try to grow it without a focus of personal brand. So then it's like personal brand gives you permission to do other things too. In fact, it's expected of a personal brand. So that, hey, I've been working on this thing for a long time, I don't want to just leave it alone. That's a trap, right? You're going through that growth right now of actually you have to level up.
100%. Where do you want to take this?
Let me ask you this. What we're prefacing, I'm just assuming everybody knows you and what you got going on. Bro, what is it that you're in the middle of?
Yeah, so just some context for anyone who might be listening for the first time. My wife and I own 8 rental properties across 3 states. The foundation of our real estate investing background came during a very busy season of life. We were both working full time. We were entering the family building phase, which we're right in the thick of right now.
Building your family.
Literally building our family. So as we were building our rental portfolio, we also started having children in rapid succession. And we had 3 kids in less than a 3-year period. And
how does that work? That's twins, right?
Yes, if for anyone doing math out there,
yeah, my God, aggressive.
There were twins in there. So we had our daughter in 2021, and then we had identical twin boys at the end of 2023. So to answer your kind of question about like context and what I'm working on now, our lives changed dramatically during the course of that transformation of bringing kids into the world. Our financial profile changed, our household monthly expenses, and also just like our financial goals shifted too, as we really tried to understand and grapple with what will it take to live the type of life that we want to live with 3 children, set ourselves up for success, set them up for success, and all that goes into that. So I think there was a personal evolution a bit of realizing that we're very proud of the portfolio we built and the manner in which we built it and all the lessons we learned. But there is this shift of we have to solve a different problem now. And because of that, it moved us towards looking at different asset classes. For a while, we were exploring commercial real estate, self-storage, like trying to follow the traditional evolution of a lot of people move from single family into commercial real estate, but none of it was really clicking or resonating until we found this residential assisted living, which is now what our kind of big bet on ourselves is on a ground up development for 2 residential assisted living homes in the Houston area where we live. And so there's plenty that went into that, but that's the evolution that we've been working on over the past 9, 10 months. And the way we talk about it and how that influences personal brand is also that's honestly one of the things that I've struggled with the most, because it feels so disconnected from what we were previously focusing on.
So two things you said there. The first I want to hammer is like solving a different set of problems. Can you describe those? I experienced that in my own life, but I want to hear from you. Like what was the problem that shifted, like specifically, if you can?
Yeah, the majority of it was financial, to be honest, when I say that, because obviously anybody logically knows when you have children, a lot of things change. But what the magnitude of that change and the window of time, the narrow window of time in which all that change occurred, was what was really jarring for us. So one kid, we could start to figure out how to balance that in with our budget. We were both still able to work full time. My wife did take a little bit of time off, but that was something we were able to do. But then she went back to her job. But then when you throw two more kids on top of that, the constraints that you have on your time, your energy, your emotional bandwidth, just Luke, I know you did this twice, right? You have, I think it's a 9 and a 10-year-old. And then I'm just going off memory here, but you had two
I'm
kids.
close.
Yeah. Back to back, two separate stints. And so there's a very intense kind of pressure and adjustment of making sure that you're able to be a good parent while also trying to make ends meet. And so the biggest change is the financial equation. We went from dual income, no kids, being able to save aggressively and even build some of our rental portfolio just by saving and then snowballing all of our rental profits into more rentals. And that strategy evaporated when we had kids because we couldn't afford that anymore. There were disruptions in our work. And then we even moved across the country once we found out we were having twins, because in Washington State, where we were living before, the cost of childcare alone, if we wanted daycare, was going to be about $7,000 a month,
Damn.
which is more than like double. That's probably
Yeah.
2 additional mortgages in addition to the actual cost of living there. And so I think that landscape changed, and it just forced us, like, the math for what we needed to get out of both our jobs and our side income was completely different. So the strategy had to change to fit.
Here's what I love about that is I meet people all day long and they're like, we're going to have one kid because financially, or we're going to have two kids because financially. And what I've learned is, like, you can't solve a complex equation without a complex equation in front of you. And so many people play it safe. And the reality is, okay, so you had to move to, where'd you move to? Houston? You had to move to Houston. Was that good or bad?
Good in a lot of ways, in the sense that I do have family here. So we have family in Washington too, though. So there was a lot of tough personal dynamics. Honestly, 2023 was probably the hardest year of our lives, second only to 2024 after the twins were actually born.
Is that because you had to make?
Yeah, very high impact, very personal decisions. So when we talk about the life cycle of being an investor, yeah, if you look chronologically at the order in which we bought and sold real estate and some of the decisions we made from an investment standpoint, what you don't see on those timelines is the emotions that went into making these high impact personal decisions. A lot of the circumstance of our investing journey was driven by our personal lives. And so I always like to say investing journey is not as linear as a lot of people make it out to be, because your life circumstances change. And in our case, like, that decision to move across the country has largely been good, but there's not without trade-offs. We left one part of the family to be closer to another and to be able to afford to live where we live, right? So that was the calculation, is where can we actually plant roots and live out the next 18 to 20 years in a place that we can afford, that has the conveniences and access to everything that we need. So again, it was a personal decision that also then had ripple effects on how we approach our investing journey too.
Yeah, I think that the old adage, focus on your income, not your budget, comes to mind. Here's what I learned is we had our first kid in San Francisco, and then we had our second kid in San Francisco in very close succession. So it wasn't twins, but we were 13 months apart or something crazy like that. And I wasn't planning on either one of those babies. So the realities of life set in. And then it's like, all right, if you're willing to think outside of the box, don't protect what you have, right? Don't protect what you have, because that's usually where the pain comes from, is how could I possibly leave this behind? And my experience is everything I left behind was the right decision. And moving forward. Like I ended up in Idaho for all the same reasons you went to Houston, and California didn't work for us anymore. But the reality of moving with the same circumstances was also a challenge for me, because no matter where you are, your job's probably not enough. And then also what you think is a lot of money probably isn't. And then if you'll blow that stuff up and just let it be the infinite possibility arena, have as many kids as you can, because the pressure that it puts on you makes you rethink your business. And like for me, the answer I wanted to hear from you, Aaron, and I'm not saying it's the right answer, it's just my answer, is time. Because yeah, financially, oh, the financial part, sure, but that really comes down to a time equation. It's like if you had more time, you'd make more money. And like for me, I've had to rethink about how I do everything, because with 4 kids, like we made the decision to move where no family was. Like that was because I made an opportunity decision, and we decided if we were willing to remove the constraints of where people we know already live, what would that look like? And the upside opportunity there was enormous. So I
Yeah, no,
relate.
it's a good call out. And I think too, the underlying kind of backdrop here is that I've worked full time this entire time. Like I took a couple breaks for paternity leave when the kids were born, but
Yeah.
for the most part, like I've held a W-2 job through COVID. I even switched industries, right? So I worked in the concerts industry for about 10 years, and then COVID shut that down very quickly. Even during that stretch, like I had about 2 months between jobs, and I full time all day, every day was applying for jobs, working my network right in the middle of COVID, work for the consulting company that I work for now, and have maintained that across multiple other big personal moves and through all the children. And so I think to your point on time has always been my biggest constraint, even more so than financial. But it's one of those things where I know you and I have worked through this in the group we're in, but which avenues, whether it's real estate, whether it's my coaching business, whether it's leaning more into my W-2, whether it's this new project, like which of those avenues is my time getting the best return without sacrificing the things I'm not willing to negotiate on, like family time? That has been the ever evolving struggle that I faced, is to figure out the answer to that question. Because there have been different times where I placed my focus and my marginal effort outside of work on certain things that did not necessarily pan out the way that I intended. And so I've had to make those pivots and try and be conscious of how I'm spending that time. You are right. Time is the ultimate resource, more so than money, but I think they are unfortunately linked more than we can separate, at least at this chapter in our life.
I think in your life specifically, because I think at the end of the day, that is a decision. And I think that hats off to you, first of all, for being stability in your family, because I know how hard that can be. And some to my men out there with W-2s, you get a lot of pressure to quit, but at the end of the day, you're doing what you got to do. And I get it. You're a dangerous young man, Aaron. You unemployed would be probably a higher earning potential than you employed. So the decisions we make around safety sometimes ties time to money. And I'm going through some of that myself as I build out a coaching business. I'm very involved in that. It is hour in, dollar out a scenario. It doesn't have the same scalability as some of the other businesses I've been successful in, but mine is also in order to create some stability and figure out how to level up in an environment. Like we're going to solve that problem. I'm rambling a little bit, but we're not solving the problem that you described as much as we are assessing today's variables and working with what we got, because your dynamics are going to change, man. And the reality is you don't just set it and forget it in this world with growing children.
Yep. No, and this is where I know you and I have had many conversations about this. I think it's a great topic to spend a couple minutes on. But the idea of like, where does a W-2 job and a steady standard paycheck fit into the equation? And kind of one of the pieces that has been I don't know if surprise is the right word, but an outcome that I wasn't expecting was that essentially by taking on the project we're taking on right now, it eliminated the need for my wife to go back after multiple pretty rapidly recurring disruptions in her career happened when she took some time off with our daughter, then she went back to work, then she took time off with the twins, and then she was faced with the decision, do I go back to work or do we lean into something bigger? And I'm grateful that by taking on the project that we're taking on, assuming all continues to progress as planned, she won't have to go back to find a steady W-2 corporate job. So in the grand scheme of our plan for our life and our family, the optionality of not having to go to a W-2 if you don't want to is a very high priority, especially while our kids are young. Because we do recognize too that right now that they're 3.5 and 1.5. And there's a window of time probably between age 5 and let's call it 12, where they're actually interested in being around us. And we still are their default people that they want to spend time with. Yes, they'll have friends, but it won't be the same as when they're teenagers and they probably don't want as much to do with us. And so we're conscious of trying to be accessible and available during that time. So the place that W-2 and all that fits into providing that flexibility and freedom, I think it is a bigger part of the equation than, like, we're considering it as an asset, that stability and dependability versus a liability. But I also want to acknowledge your comment that by occupying the majority of your time during a Monday through Friday with a W-2, it also puts a cap on the potential of your ideas outside of that. So like if you unshackle and you want to build a side business and you can spend that 40 hours doing outreach and collaborations and other things that could grow that business, I agree that there is you do cap your potential as well. But those are just some kind of loose thoughts I have on it.
No, I like it. And just to touch on it with you, like what I noticed you doing there is a framing of things as assets or liabilities. And the reality is, like, we all do that. Your W-2 is what you label it to be. And if it's what you need right now, then it's what you need right now. But that's a decision you make too, because a guy like you with sales potential, an organized approach, and the experience you have in real estate, like, you could catapult past your current level of income. And I think that's the risk most people aren't willing to take. And family makes it very simple to point back to that risk and say, actually, what we need right now is stability. And I would say that's not always the right answer, because to your point, scheduling time with your kids is not the same thing as being infinitely available. And beyond 12, they probably need you as much or more than they needed you when they were kids. And I'm running into that personally of, like, my kids got simple for a minute, my older ones. And I thought we had come through something together and, like, the next chapter was going to be easier, but it was just different. And then I also then went back in to have more kids with my wife because we were like, wow, this does become manageable. And the reality is it doesn't. And we multiplied into 4, and I've got babies that need something, and I've got these preteens that need something different. But it is not as simple as, well, we've moved through the heavy lifting of time allotment to children. Like, and I'm not saying you're saying that, Aaron. This isn't a pushback on what you said. It's just as I relate to what you're going through, you can be careful with the way that you frame opportunity and liability, because the reality is you could be making $1 million a year instead of a salaried job. And that would be a much better allocation of risk and time.
And I think that I'll add to that because I agree with the sentiment 100%. And by labeling it the way I am, I also think that there's a reevaluation of that has to occur pretty regularly, especially when things are moving as quickly as they are. We're launching this project of extreme magnitude where, in theory, in 2 years from now, things will look very different in many ways, both financially, operationally, like our vision, our connection to our family's purpose, all these things aligning, where 24 months from now, if I'm reflecting exactly the way I'm reflecting right now, that would be a disservice to myself, right? We have to start acknowledging when variables change, how does the framing change? So I think that even though right now I perceive that it's a bigger asset to be in my W-2 at this exact moment that we're recording this,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean that has to be the case 1 year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now. And I do think that kind of acknowledging that point, this is one of the blessings of having an entrepreneurial inclination, is to see where those different thresholds are. Like, when can I have enough flexibility through real estate or entrepreneurship that I no longer feel that way? And then I can make an informed decision at that time, whether it's still the right move for me. But I've made it no secret, I think, for right now, like, work optional is my goal. It's not a burning desire to make a change right as soon as humanly possible. The other element, which sounds like a boring cop-out when we're talking about all this cool mindset stuff, but bankability. I think that's something for real estate investors to really remember. And especially as we go after this gargantuan commercial SBA loan, you have to make the bank itself want to lend to you. And then you also have to comply with SBA requirements and the criteria they look for. We're trying to get ground up construction and a startup business funded in the same project with several $1 million loan components. And the W-2, your relevant experience and history, all that stuff is a factor, and the W-2 is a big one. So I would say even if I wanted to make that decision right this second at the time of this recording, it would pretty much single-handedly tank our project if I did.
Totally get that. And I guess you're successfully selling yourself on the variables, because should you have had experience in this space already, that probably looks better than your W-2 income. Because there's this moment where your ability to borrow against your income is its own cap, and you break through that at a certain point in any investment circle where, like, all right, it's no longer about my earning potential. It's the project's success that they lend money for. So the cycle of, I hear you, and I also agree that you're safely stepping through chapters of your investment career, which is fine, dude. I'm not even criticizing, and I'm just making clear that the way that I see it is the variables are, and you're allowing them to be, and it's not that it couldn't be any different. It could be very different. And anybody listening to this, don't set small goals because you'll get them. And I'm not even saying you're doing that, Aaron. I'm just like, W-2 is historically the worst way to earn because of taxation. It may feel safe, but I'm not saying that it is.
Yeah, I feel you. And I think it's all a choice. Everyone has that ability to make a choice. I just know that they're particularly within the average listener to this show and then the program that we run, we try and make it a choice that you don't have to make. You don't have to leave your job to find success in real estate, especially if your job is something you enjoy. And
Totally.
if you do want that path, I don't think there's anything right or wrong. It's all individualized. And I think that's part of the point you're trying to make too.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, because I want to touch on that piece. If you're doing the job you have because the organization allows you to be fully yourself, then stay with your job. If you are framing it as a safe asset, I would argue that the safety of a W-2 position is questionable. And what feels safe sometimes is a very low ceiling. If not, you could be fired tomorrow. So this idea that I couldn't earn without, I'm like, my experience is this. If you are willing to do whatever it takes, you actually tend to build more creatively and with more upside potential outside of a job. Make somebody else rich or make yourself rich. Bet on yourself. That's and that will always be my encouragement to you, Aaron. And I'm not trying to break your audience's mind around should you have a job or not. The answer isn't clear. I'm just saying the frame of stability is often an incorrect lens, because there is no stability in job. You could be fired tomorrow, and then the qualifications as an employee are not as valuable as the qualifications as a business owner, even if the bank is looking at you. Success in the space you're moving in is easier to lend against than you're a W-2 distracted person trying to take on a multi-million-dollar project as a side hustle.
Yeah, no, and that's a really good dynamic too to call out, right? Is that we basically carved out my wife's primary allocation of her time towards this project, and we have my W-2 as a financial backstop. So from the bank's perspective, we've created a successful setup for this business to grow. If we were both full-time W-2, to the point you just made, it would be really hard to say that we could succeed in a business that's going to require, at a minimum, one person's full-time effort and energy, if not multiple. So there are definitely trade-offs. I would also say too that I think about being over-indexed on any one income stream, whether it's your W-2 or anything else, is a dangerous proposition. So to your point, if you're all in on W-2 and you're a dual income household, each person's making 150 grand, you might be in a great position at that moment. But the second one of those gets disturbed or eliminated or whatever may happen, it creates a huge issue. And if you're overly indexed and overly dependent on those one or two income streams, the effect of one going away is much greater. So that's one of the reasons that for the last 6-7 years, we focused on building a stream of income through rental properties. We focused on spreading out some of our wealth and where it's held and where it's preserved and where it's growing in different channels that are not just our 401k. I'm a huge believer in that. Even if you have a W-2 that you enjoy, never become too over-indexed on it. And that's part of why real estate and small business, like those are great vehicles, but it's finding the right ones, because it is challenging. At some point you run out of hours in the day. It is challenging to succeed at all of those things at the same time. And I think the final point I'd make on it is that there will come a point at which it is undeniable that your W-2 is constraining your potential more than if you were not in it. And you could bet on your potential by making that decision before you have evidence of that. Like you could say what you've told me, which is that, Aaron, if you didn't have a job, I think you could not only replace but exceed your income in a relatively small timeline just by repurposing all that effort and energy. And maybe that's true, but there's also, you can build things slow and steady to where you have proof of concept, and that if only I leaned in further into this existing thing that I've already built, then it will achieve that, have a more direct line of sight into when that potential point is. Again, that's just another way that I think about that.
Yeah, and I like it. You're building through chapters in your life, which is healthy, and it's a good segue into the actual conversation we're supposed to have today. So you're in the event space and COVID shows up and you pivot and you go into consulting because what you learned in the event space was an applicable skill set that brought you into consulting around organization. And maybe it still has a very event vibe, whatever it is that you're doing. But rather than focus on what that is, I'm like, you also acknowledge that by building another income stream, like semi-passive income stream on the side, you had an opportunity beyond a W-2 to create wealth for your family. And actually, maybe the most stable thing you own is the controlled asset of your portfolio. Is that about right?
Yeah, it is. And I think too that there's a concept I've come to label it own your upside. And it was based on this idea that in the entertainment industry, I was doing really cool, high impact things. High impact is more important to me than cool. I was working on some of the biggest shows in the world. I had a very behind the scenes look, not only just at the venue, that's not the part I care about, but I was in the contracts. Like I was the one helping redline contracts. I was the one at the show talking to the tour managers. I was reconciling these multi-million-dollar ticketing audits, looking through expenses, like even doing some real-time negotiation, like tons of incredible skills that served me very well in the context of my current W-2 job and have served me well in real estate. And so I think it was actually, I know you like to make the point of like when you're uncomfortable is when you usually make some of most groundbreaking change in your life. But when COVID forced me to find a different career track, it also forced me to evaluate. I had felt like in my head, like all my skills were hyper specialized to the music industry and nobody would ever value those the way that a music industry job would. But it forced me in that 2 or 3 months between jobs, I had to go and basically do an audit of all my skills. What do I have that I can add value to other people in the world and in the marketplace, right? What skills and personality, whatever it is, can I exchange value with someone else for a paycheck and opportunity to grow? And it led me towards consulting, and it was a very non-obvious transition at the time. But in hindsight, now I can see the through line. So I think the point I'm trying to make here is that people don't always realize the skill set that they're already sitting on and how that might attach to a new chapter or a new venture. And so that was a discovery element when I switched careers.
Yeah, and it took the disruption of COVID for you to make that move, and it could have been you clung to the safety of where you already were without that kind of disruption. I guess that's tying it back to the children piece. Every time I have a kid, I can't imagine what it's going to do to my life. I just know it's going to be crazy. So if we were to have another child, I would prepare less and I would react with more agility to the current circumstance because I learned with the fourth kid what my time constraints were going to be, and I don't get to just grind it out anymore. The challenge I have is the stability I built as a real estate agent is a very sporadic, time-intensive activity with a high yield. But the challenge there is when you don't have control of indefinite availability is the currency of real estate agency. So as that shifted, I had to shift my focus. But what I'm excited about is the next like tectonic shift, like when it gets so disruptive that you can't do, like there's no way to do what you were doing before. You tend to rebrand. You tend to find, you take inventory of what you have and where you've come, and then you move into the next space. And it's like a rebirth. It's like the energy that comes from that. It's not as simple as now I'm successful in this next thing. In fact, the growth is really the most exciting part of any journey anyway. If there's no arrival, it's I want meteors to hit me on a regular basis so that I can have to grow through that. Because at this point, like I joke all the time that I don't need a job until I can't get one. Like the skill set I've built in sales and business ownership, dude, I wouldn't take any position, period. But if you were to offer me one, it would have to be CEO because it's the only place I feel like I get to be fully exposed in growth and as a creative professional here. You got your W-2, you're building this side project, which is an 8-property portfolio with significant momentum. You did that quickly. The velocity of that move was appropriate with market timing. And I think one of the things you cling to now is, I learned how to do this, I want to teach. That's a coaching platform that you've built with marginal success there because the industry shifted on us and it became entry-level investing became a lot harder because it's capital intensive and the cost of money just that problem doesn't want to solve itself against stubborn pricing. And rather than stay there and wait for the next wave, you're leveling up. What did you learn building that 8-property portfolio that qualifies you for this next crazy thing you're doing?
Yeah, so I guess kind of a couple of things there, right? One is I built alongside my partner, Nathan. We built the Remote Real Estate Academy, which is something I'm very proud of. It encapsulates all of the lessons that I learned, all the lessons he learned. We have very aligned philosophy on, again, this idea of the kind of hybrid real estate professional archetype. You can work, you can have a family, you can balance it together and still make enormous consequential wealth building decisions for you and your family. So I feel fully resolved in having spent the time to encapsulate all that into a package that is now available if people want it. We have a course, we do still have our community platform, and then we have a more intensive kind of one-on-one or two-on-one in this scenario coaching program. And thankfully, yourself, the other two gentlemen in our mastermind group, and a lot of other people that I love and trust have told me that nobody can ever take that away from me, the experience of having gone through it and the ability to have served the people that we did serve. And I'm not in any way, shape, or form shying away from that or slamming the door. But to your point, I am trying to give myself permission to evolve into a new exciting chapter where we are focused pretty clearly on residential assisted living. I know we barely talked about that as an asset class, and I don't think that's really the point of this conversation. But suffice it to say, residential assisted living comes with a whole new set of challenges. It's a business. There's a real estate component, but it is largely a business. You're operating 24/7. In most cases, you're serving vulnerable populations. We have 2 houses in Vegas that are leased to a company that provides services for adults with developmental disabilities. And then the 2 homes we're building here in Houston are going to be licensed for memory care, serving people with Alzheimer's and dementia. So to even equate those to a standard single-family rental property, there's not a ton of direct parallel on the business side. With that said, I have also gained a lot of experience dealing with and understanding how to work with banks, building relationships across the country, hundreds of people that have been built into my network over the past 6-7 years I've been doing this, including mentors, people I've looked up to that have made the graduation from single family rentals into commercial deals. I've invested in other people's deals where I've gotten visibility behind the scenes into how these kind of syndicated offerings work. And then I've also worked with a series of coaches myself to prepare me for this moment. I'm in multiple mastermind groups. Luke and I are in a group together. I'm in a residential assisted living specific mastermind group. We hired a mentor who's built these exact 2 buildings, who's going to work the entire project lifecycle with us from development to actually booting up and operating the business. They're going to be invested as minority partners. So we, if anything, almost have too many perspectives versus not enough. Like we're absolutely trying to recognize what we don't know and where we need help, but also balance that with the bias for action, which I think you and I share that, where we're pretty good at taking action. And, sometimes if anything, you just got to figure out how to calibrate so that you're not being too hasty, but you're also not getting caught in analysis paralysis. Probably one of the hardest skills in investing, entrepreneurship, whatever it is to not get caught in that messy middle where you know what you want to do, but you haven't done it. And you're just looking for constant validation in order to make a decision. So I think we've followed the signals where we've seen them. We're drawing parallels from our past experience where applicable, but we're also not trying to draw parallels that don't exist. There's a lot of new stuff that if we draw exclusively on our prior experience, it won't apply. And if anything, it might mislead us into the wrong decisions. I don't know. There's a roundabout answer to your question, but
That's beautiful. And I think
yeah.
it's worth touching on in there is this idea of the fourth dimension, which is time cost, because I've run into this in a lot of areas of my business. The ability to make quick decisions, even if they're incorrect, is often the most valuable skill set you can have, and why some entrepreneurs thrive and some fail, because there's the time cost, but sometimes time actually has a cost. Like, other than I wasted my time on that, you can be holding a project bleeding financially and having to make fast decisions to move the project to completion for the refinance or the exit strategy of some kind. So I can appreciate that probably your consulting builds you for that as well. But coming out of like how the bridge I heard between where you were and where you're going is residential real estate. And then you specifically mentioned the differential and business plan. Like, why? I think if I could identify one of the things I see as a talent of yours, it's same reason you built an out-of-state investment portfolio and a coaching platform around that is assessing opportunity and moving into those markets. Maybe that's the bag of tricks that brings you over into assisted living, but how did you choose that?
Yeah, so a few things. One, there's a personal connection. So my wife, her grandparents both had Alzheimer's. My grandmother had dementia. Her father had early onset dementia. And in all these scenarios, they were in these big, smelly facilities that were everyone was overworked, underpaid, pretty unhappy environment, and not somewhere that you felt good when you left. You went to visit your family member. You're glad you got to see them, but then when you're leaving, you're like, oh my God, I wish there was something better. And so I think that personal experience really combined with learning that there's residential assisted living, which is the antithesis of that big box, big smelly facility. That idea in and of itself ignited a passion, especially in my wife, who has a very deep personal connection. She was in her 20s when what happened with her dad, and that stuck with her. And so having some fire behind the idea is what it's going to take to succeed in an industry that's 24/7, has all these operational challenges and complexities. So the first element is the personal connection. And the second is trend behind this industry is undeniable. The population's aging faster than we have the capacity to serve them. There's already a 1 million bed shortage across the US for memory care and residential assisted living. And that trend is only set to worsen over the decades to come. There's 77 million baby boomers, I believe is the number in the US. And we're in one of the more populated cities in the country. And we've done a ton of research to validate that the area that we plan to build not only currently has the demand, but that demand is forecast to increase. And so we spent 9 or 10 months, I think we're coming up on 10 months of pre-search before we even went under contract. And then since we've been under contract, all the different steps to validate not only the demand, but the viability of the project, right? Working with builders, architects, civil engineers, all that stuff. And so it's been a combination of things that have gotten us to the point where we feel like you had an idea, you work as hard as you possibly can to validate that idea. We're also socializing it and getting feedback from other people by sharing about this project and hearing how personal of a connection there is. Just about anyone has had some experience with family members in old age growing to have to require medical attention or some accommodations beyond what they can offer. And so it hits close to home, if not at home, for just about everyone we've talked to. So the validation is coming from all directions, which then gives us the resolve to make such a concentrated bet, knowing that it also has long-term potential in the future. If we get this off the ground, right now we're being viewed as first-time operators, totally understandably. And so there's a big uphill battle to just prove that we're credible enough to the outside world, whether it's the banks, investors, whomever. But once we can get this up and running and prove our operational track record, then we can also scale this to continue to serve that ever-growing demand and do it in a way that fits our family's vision. And I think it combines all the things that we love, which is being able to make an impact and also have a financial opportunity that can afford us all that flexibility, that time freedom, everything we've been talking about. It just checks all the boxes in that regard, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's really exciting to hear like where the idea was birthed. So if I like to game it out, it's like you guys were talking about the challenges of your own experiences in this particular space. And then my guess is your opportunity gears started turning and you started doing some research on the subject, which showed your wife that there was better than an opportunity for you guys to get involved here. Is that about right?
Yeah, and if you think about it, I mentioned earlier that I explored self-storage,
Yeah.
larger multifamily. I had my eyes open for a strategy that could work given the new constraints of our lives. 3 young children, her not working a full-time W-2. And so instead of dual income, no kids, we had a new landscape. And so I explored a bunch of different stuff, but none of it clicked the
Right.
way this did because we didn't have the personal tie-in. We didn't see that overwhelming demand. Like the barriers to entry were a bit lower in some of those other spaces where I actually believe that by committing as hard as we have, and if we're willing to do what most other people aren't willing to do, it gives us a greater chance of success, especially if we have passion behind it. So there's just a lot of stuff sliding into place that makes this the obvious path for us, given all the circumstances.
Yeah. And I would say it's an interesting thing too, because you do point back to family constraints, but also single and family investing in single family rentals. It lacks luster at this point too. So it's almost like economically the circumstance of opportunity have changed and your willingness to move forward anyway has you looking for opportunity. Cause I think storage has happened already too. I know a good guy who manages storage and they're having issues like everybody is because of the cost of money and vacancy rates. So like it's an interesting thing to hear you tie it back to your family, but also you're moving with economic tides to some degree. Like you're aware enough to know that you can't just do what you've been doing and agile enough to identify an area where the business model is currently working, especially around demand.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. The tide has shifted, and there's a lot of things that worked 5, 6 years ago that don't work as well now. The only thing I would add to that, though, is that right now we need to make a change in how we're pursuing our real estate journey due to some very specific individual circumstances in addition to the macro changes. I still believe wholeheartedly that if somebody is planning to work 20, 30 more years in their W-2, they have a stable income and a career path that they like, and maybe they already have stock holdings and like they're stable and feeling good, and they're not looking for real estate to be the answer to every one of their problems. Single family real estate, especially long distance, when you can build it in a market that fits your goals and maybe stack a few of those for a period of time and then hold them for the long term, that's still an incredible strategy. I don't care if the interest rates are 9% or 3%. There's still a lot of merit in that strategy, which is why I still believe that it's important to work with new people that are entering the space, teach them those skills. Because if you cut straight to trying to do some crazy project with a ton of moving pieces, but you have no background, I do think that it's easier to make the rookie cost of entry mistakes when the stakes themselves are lower than if you were to try and unfortunately make some of them. I think some mistakes are unavoidable. Some are avoidable, but the unavoidable ones come with experience of just doing. And if
Totally.
the first time you make those mistakes is on a $10 million project where you have a bunch of investor capital, that's not going to be good. But
Yeah.
if you make some mistakes with your own money on a $100,000 house in Ohio, not that I have anything against those houses, but like the stakes are lower
Yeah.
and you might be able to absorb that lesson and arm yourself with it for the future so that when you are stewarding other people's capital and you are taking on bigger projects, you don't have to make the mistake then. So that's just the
Totally.
nuance I would add.
Yeah, and I love it because to qualify too, I am currently investing in residential real estate as a small investor. It's not that it's the wrong time. It's just that it is also, there are bigger plays out there and the business model around residential can be reconsidered. I knew a lot of people moved into the short-term space. It didn't make sense to me. I wasn't doing that. And I'm not saying it was the right or wrong decision. I'm just like, you always got to be looking at the opportunity that you're focused on and see if the yield is worth the squeeze. And I think there is this moment where you're moving into another business model because potentially you need higher yield for your time in. You've qualified at a decent hour rate, I'm sure. And now it's like it needs to be better than that for us to pursue it. So that's a leveling up, but also tying it back to circumstance. It's like babies show up and you got to rethink the way that you're doing business. And the economy shifts and you got to rethink the way that you're doing business. It could be you're so stable in a high paid W-2 position that the money coming out of that project buys you a single family home every year, no matter what, no matter your market. But I would say that's not necessarily an exciting thing. And that's not necessarily the most efficient way to build wealth in real estate. I'm in Detroit right now working with Travis. You should get him on this show. He does a very unique product in a very compelling market. I bought a duplex for $45,000. I was legitimately minimizing risk by capital in. I'm lending money in Ohio to Nate. I don't know if you've met Nate. He's on X, crushing it out there, and a very hardworking young man, but same thing. The amount of money he requires is low enough that it's worth the risk. And I'm learning in these low risk environments after having built a management company and a stable investment base here in Idaho. So I'm not saying stay away from residential. I'm just acknowledging the fact that you are leveling up, my friend. You're going through the growing pains of moving up in your investment career. And you reluctantly almost, because you want to help those people get started, and you don't have to stop doing that. But I think kudos to you, because as you lead into this next business model, it's like music translated into consulting. It's like single family translates very well into an understanding of how to navigate that next space, and you're pioneering for your coaching group.
Yeah, no, I have always appreciated that perspective. It's been hard. What I realized is that I basically wasn't giving myself permission to evolve in that regard, at least as a personal branding and how I present myself in public. And that was something that I know we've talked about in private a lot, is the way I talk about my experience, the way we are sharing our journey as we go. It has been interesting and more challenging than I thought, mostly due to my own head than anything else, to lean into the narrative change because it feels random in certain ways. But for all the reasons we discussed on this show, it was born out of opportunity. It was born out of circumstance. It's born from a genuine desire to have the impact we want to have in the world. Like there are plenty of reasons why we're doing what we're doing. And the more I get out there and talk about it, and the more I get comfortable with talking about it, the easier that is for me to see. But it did start with actually giving myself permission to evolve instead of just trying to constrain myself to the narrative that I think I should be talking about, which frankly is an ego thing anyway. And whether you think of it that way or not, which of course I wasn't, that's what it boils down to. So I think it's releasing myself from the pressure of my own ego and then giving myself some permission to evolve.
Yeah. And here's what I say to everybody who's watching this. You do not need permission to reinvent yourself. You don't need it. And the reality is, if you're living in some version of you that has already existed, like, it's time. It is time. And people are not paying attention the way you think that they are. And a pivot is sometimes the most interesting thing you're going to do. It might be the reason people start paying attention. So to sit there in some old clothes, acting like it's the only way anybody would recognize you, I think it's undervaluing your actual person. And your evolution is the only thing that interests me. And I'm saying that to you, Aaron, but I'm saying that to everybody else. Like, the only thing you're doing that's interesting is evolving. So you don't need permission to make a drastic change in your life. And if you're employed and you shouldn't be, or you have a business owner, you should be employed, like, do it. You know what I mean? And like, the fourth dimension is time, man. If you're wasting time, you're wasting a lot of valuable resources. So stuck is a choice. It's not a position. It's a damn choice.
Amen, my friend. It's been a lot of fun being on this side of the hot seat. I have always appreciated you as not only a friend, but as an incredible coach. You've always brought great perspective, especially when I'm struggling with stuff. And so it's fun to do this on air. And I'll be very interested to hear some feedback. If anybody learned anything either about me or my situation, or maybe something that they connected to their own personal situation from this episode, would love if people could drop a comment or reach out. But Luke, where can people find you if they want to connect with you?
I'm currently focused on building my personal brand on Instagram. So luke.w.gilbert is my handle. And I do as much as I can to share my growth and help grow people on that channel. But you could always find Aaron. He'll put you in touch with me. I love talking real estate and I love talking investment. So if there's anything I could do to help any of you guys out there, please get in touch.
And for whatever it's worth, Luke and I met through Twitter DMs, like a year and a half ago.
Probably.
And that started a great friendship and a great relationship. So don't discount the quality of relationships you can build on social media. You just got to
Totally.
have a little bit of courage and initiative to reach out.
Yeah, and don't undervalue your network. The people you know right now might be big players in your future. And I have a principle of focus on the relationship. Aaron and I have gotten to know each other that way. There's no exchange here as much as an exchange of ideas and an exchange of appreciation and an exchange of vulnerability. So give that. You can't buy community. You can't join community without giving community. So if you're out there banging your head against social media, you're probably either not being generous or open enough, and start doing those things. Because literally, I've made some of my best friends in the space online, which was a surprise for me. I was a door-to-door salesman. I believe in in-person interaction. But when you can, that was my own stuck place. That was my own personal brand evolution that I've had to go through. So you don't need permission, and lean into the network you're building like a real human being, and you'd be amazed at what happens.
I love it, man. Thanks again for coming on. We'll have to do it again.
Thanks for
real
having
soon.
me. Yeah, I'm counting on it.
Take care. Thank you for making it to the end of today's episode. As you may know, podcasts are very difficult to grow organically. If you're getting value from today's episode, I'd deeply appreciate if you could take 30 seconds to leave my show a 5-star rating and review. This will go a long way to helping me reach more listeners just like you. Thank you so much in advance.